Thanks, everybody.
Yeah,
John
all
Willis.
good.
All right, good. Thank you. Security differently. John Willis. I'm actually a senior director of global transformation office at Red Hat. Just quickly, who I am. Botchka Loop is the best place to get a hold of me. Done about 10 startups and 10 books over 40 plus years. Probably most notable is the DevOps Handbook, but also Beyond the Phoenix Project, also some research papers on automated governance, and then you can see all the different places I've traveled in and out of, including selling a company to Docker, selling a company to Dell, done like 10 startups. Anyway, one last thing I did want to do, so in the shameless plug section of this, I've actually been a Deming freak for many years, and I finally got off my lazy butt and created a podcast around Deming. It's been a blast. I've been interviewing different people, so pretty cool stuff. Check it out. So here's a question about this presentation, which is, we've done a great job. DevOps, right? We're we're more than 10 years old, but I'm going to say we're 10 years old because the math works better for me. And we've done a great job. The glass is definitely half full. All this, The question I started when I thinking about this presentation that I started early this year, which is, what would DevSecOps look like if DevOps never existed? And what I mean is, like, we've done a great job, like that square peg that's been shaved down to fit into the hole. I mean, what if we actually started with all the security primitives? I think all the automation we've done in the name of DevSecOps, putting things in the pipeline, all those, great things, right? But the question then is, have we shaved some areas off, or are we still missing some basic primitives? And that's part of what I'm trying to put here is, and the thing that came to mind is when I hear people talk about, hey, John, come look at our DevSecOps architecture, or reference structure. And I'm like, that's great. You got SaaS, you got software composition, you got all these things automated that used to either not exist or manual, and they're in the pipeline. But then you talk about like how you sort of work within the 3 lines of defense. And I think immediately that's an anti-pattern. Would that have existed if we started day one with DevSecOps? Hopefully that's making sense. And if you go back to one of the original caricatures, or what we could say, there was the original core kind of conflict of DevOps, right? There was this sort of developer, there was wall of confusion. In fact, my boss, Andrew Clay Schaefer, little idea on Twitter, was in the same time that John Osborne was doing 10 deploys a day of Flickr and sort of the landmark presentation of sort of DevOps and continuous delivery. Andrew was in a non-videotape presentation talking about this problem, which is, and we get into that wall of confusion. And I think, in the glass half full discussion, we've done a great job. That wall has been pretty much destroyed. And then, of course, you can't do a DevOps presentation or any modern cloud native presentation without mentioning Conway's law, except there's a method to my madness here, is that, I won't belabor this. If you haven't heard of it, then go look it up, Wikipedia. But organizations design systems that mirror the communication structure. So I go back to my 3 lines of defense, and did we really create the culture that we wanted? Do we actually have 2 lines? Where the first line is kind of owning the control. Second line is basically has 2 roles. One is a liaison between the third line, and also is theoretically the owner with no responsibility, right? Like, these are all the things that were terrible pre-DevOps, right? The first line doesn't talk. Second line, there's no, by definition, there are like these, virtual firewalls for communication. And so what do we need to do, right? Like, when we talk about safety differently, right? I say there's really sort of 3 things that we should do that I don't think we're terrible at, right? Minimal viable security. How do we prove that we're safe? And how do we demonstrate that we're secure? And how do we do both? Because first, they're not the same thing, right? When we talk about, basically the way people prove that they're safe is basically change records. I mean, it's a very subjective model of evidence. I put this in the change record, we have the audits, and in fact, the audits are the demonstration, right? And so this is what we need to do, is sort of move out of this implicit security to very explicit proof-based, and I'll go a little deeper. Or more specifically, could we change from a subjective model to objective and verifiable? Instead of our audits being like Joe told Sue and Sue told Sally, and they did this, and they did this, of sort of this subjective conversation in a change record saying that's the evidence. And then think about all the toil, right? The auditors come in and like, okay, Sue, you missed the comma here. And like, it's like a telephone game. And so what happens, you waste 30 or 40 days a year, you're sending back emails, and there's, sort of arguments. It's not a really great condition for collaboration, as opposed to, could we create this objective structure? So as I was thinking about I thought a lot about, and this, hold on to your seats because you're going to hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it until somebody gives me an argument for a better phrase, which is, I'm calling it post-cloud native modernization. I know, all right, go ahead and throw up 3 times, but to me, I didn't want to just say cloud native security or cloud native GRC. That's just nonsense. What I wanted to say is there's a world that exists after you've gotten into this cloud native stuff that defines a new way to think about security. And then to me, what are the real important things? Because if you think about security, when we say DevSecOps, the horizontal spread of all the things we can talk about could go on for days. So I wanted to basically, stay away from DevSecOps in a, sort of anything goes security to this post-cloud native concept, where what's the matrix? And I think it comes down to 3 things: risk, defense, and trust. And then we go from, like I said earlier, we're trying to move from subjective to objective and verifiable. So let's take each one. Risk. A subjective implementation of risk is a change management tickets. Or, we put our records in, like Sue tells Sally, who tells Bob, who tells Jim. And objective then becomes more non-human, explicit. I was say things like think blockchain, but don't use blockchain. But imagine all the things, and I'll have a chart later, I'll show you, where all those things that we want to happen or must happen from a regulatory control standpoint actually happen without humans. Imagine that, automation. And they're in some digital format that forms a list of digital evidence. And that's not good enough, right? That's great, and most people aren't even there. But then we have to actually start injecting, because what we deliver at the pipeline is the beginning. Then there's drift and all that, right? So there's this notion of chaos security or continuous verification. Like, a port should never been open. Let's just open a port. If this this vulnerability in a library that is vulnerable in an image should never start. Well, let's start it. And then on the defense side, we move from detect and respond to intelligent data lakes, right? And we start getting much better at aggregating and intelligence, so that if we're going to do automated remediation and things like that, we're working from a much stronger place. And then if you haven't followed Shannon Leach, she's brilliant. She's one of my mentors. She's over, actually she changed jobs. So, but some of her work on adversary analysis is just brilliant, right? So again, verifiable. And then finally on trust, I want to definitely honor the time, so I may go really fast when we get to the trust section, although it is a very important section. But again, we move from perimeter-based, like I'm protected because I got IDSs all around my perimeter. I spent all my money blocking people getting in. Guess what? They get in no matter what. It's like water falling down a mountain. So then we move to what I would say is table stakes, which is zero trust architectures. But that's not even good enough, because we see some of the latest, like the Capital ones, and those, like even within the trusted zones, you can do server-side request forgery. You can forge your who you are, and so we really need to move into what is emerging as distributed trust. So like within clusters, things like Spiffy, or we have some tools that Red Hat is using that can think about very just in time or ephemeral certificates, cluster-based, you're trusted. So 3 novel ideas, automated governance, that idea of sort of think blockchain, don't use blockchain, cyber data lakes, and then distributed trust models for identity and secrets. And secrets too, yeah. Risk differently. So what do we want to do here for risk? We want to reduce toil. Right, so here's the thing, like most organizations today are high toil-based for their audit process, which is supposed to be a good thing, right? The auditors, and there should be a symbiotic relation, not the wall of confusions that I showed earlier, right? We really want, internal audit, we want risk, and we want the delivery teams to be working together to at first, profit and brand reputation, and then we want to increase efficacy. We don't want these sort of nonsense. For years I've been doing this presentation, 7 deadly sins of DevOps. And the 7th deadly sin is security and compliance theater, right? Like, okay, we passed the audit, but like, oh my God, like we are so unsafe, it's unbelievable. And so, as I talked about, you need to sort of move to objective, immutable evidence, continuous verification. And it's been I've been lucky enough to be involved in some really good work over the years. Back, in IT Revolution, Gene Kim's organization, there's a bunch of us, probably 50 or so people every year, work on these forum papers. And back in 2015, these are all Creative Commons. There's a reference paper called An Unlikely Union, DevOps and Audit. We talk about segregation of duties and why DevOps can work. In 2018, Dear Auditor, which was an apology letter to the auditors. But what was even more interesting, which was all the sort of promises that were pretty. And then in 2019, I worked on a team where we created this first proof case of a reference architecture of this immutable evidence in the pipe chain. And a lot of this was built on Capital One's original paper in 2017. You might want to check this out, where they said, here's how we did our pipelines, and they created this structure for developers to say, if you could show evidence of this, you could bypass the cap. And then we just took that one step further with Topo Powell, who was one of the original authors of this paper, to say, let's turn that into immutable evidence for audit sake. And so we created this paper that one I just referenced earlier, DevOps Automated Governance. I won't go through some gory detail, but we broke out the stages of delivery based on boundaries for audit and attestations. Attestation audit, if I say it's the same word. And we created actors and control points. And if you look, like, we've been adding to this list over the years, you can see some of the really cool things in there, just basic stuff, but like cyclomatic complexity, like don't even get started unless you have a minimum chain size and a reasonable low level of cyclomatic complexity. And these all become gates and immutable, digitally signed evidence. And so you could go through, you can see the list of sort of build stage, versioning, SAS scan, package, artifact versioning, metadata packaging, code signing, and whatnot. And then what we did working with some of the banks is we were able to use that system then to create an overlay and abstraction where we call it risk as code, which is YAML file that describes all those things in those previous charts, right? And then we just finished the second version, and we actually did it in a Phoenix project format. It's called Investments Unlimited. It'll be out this summer. So we took a company that failed an audit and we worked through all the things that an implementation of a couple of banks have actually implemented from that first guide. They didn't want to put in the actual bank information, so we made up a fake company. It was pretty cool. I'm going to skip this. I just want to say I was actually asked to go into SolarWinds and present automated governance to the executive team there. And if you're familiar with MITRE and MITRE attack vectors and MITRE attack framework, I went ahead and showed them that all the things that CrowdStrike identified could have actually been exposed. Now, I'm not saying it would have stopped everything, but their breach within SolarWinds, I showed an example. Again, you can have access to this presentation. And so here's some of the solutions. Software bill of materials, if you haven't followed, I would definitely take a look at that. And again, 25 minutes is tough. I empathize with the previous speaker. But it's our job as speakers to make sure we finish on time. The defense differently. Just remember, I talked about it's again about reducing defense toil and increasing efficacy. So unified approach to SIM and SOAR, data lakes, deception technology, adversary analysis. Another work that I've been doing, which has been a lot of work for oNUG. This has been fascinating stuff called automated cloud governance. This is all Creative Commons. You look for oNUG. We've created something called Cloud Security Notification Framework. It is a really cool project. Some of the biggest banks and insurance companies in the world are working on this. And what we're trying to do is, instead of getting different events from different cloud providers, the problem is if you get an event from sort of Google, or you get an event for AWS, or you get an event from Azure, they might have the same meaning, but they look contextually all that different. And then there's a second order problem, which is how do you get the common meta, like the account, the resource? They all have different names for those. So the CSNF is about basically creating a structure, and we got most of the providers involved in this right now, and creating a common structure so that these events can not only look the same, like it's a permissive grant privileges, like would look the same, but then we give the capability to normalize the sort of meta information. And that's how you get much more meaningful data lakes, and then also things like automated remediation when your structure is. And then just as a side, we built sort of sidecars, if you will, in terms of MITRE and NIST around it. So we figure out for you what is the sort of MITRE attack vector or the NIST. So some really good stuff here. And then last but not least, like I said, trust, about that third level of this post-cloud native security thinking that I'm trying to propose is, we look for, zero trust architectures. Again, that's table stakes, right? Some of the stuff which is interesting, most people only look at FedRAMP in the US when they have to sort of go through a government agency to get FedRAMP. But there's some great documentation tools there that you can use whether you're going through FedRAMP or not, right? Because those, to do that, you just have to work all the way backwards towards all your sort of controls. And then I think there's opportunities for changes in distributed secret management. Like today, like Vault is the rage, and it's a great product. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is when we think about sort of trust or authorities, right? Most of our mindset is still this north-south structure. Like, if you get in, you authenticate, and then you become. And then the problem is, in today's world, everything we do is east-west. I think if we learn this from the software-defined networking phase of our industry, right? Like we moved, networking was, back in the day, 90% or 95% of all the traffic was north-south. Now today, large scale cloud providers, it's like 99% of the traffic is east-west. Well, we need to think that way about trust too. We have to stop thinking about how do I, make you do a billion things to authenticate yourself, and then you can kind of do all these things, as opposed to very much, when we live in a world of service meshes and sort of clusters and ephemeral containers and all those things. Though this model around, certificate transparency, we've got a thing called SigStar at Red Hat, but there's other. Spiffy is a really good project that I think can evolve around this very east-west. And so when I talk about secrets management, even in some point, I might get in big trouble here. Vault might be a north-south transactional system, where the idea that like if I can do everything based on a cluster and a node-to-node trust, like the world can change a little bit, right? So I'm probably actually ahead of time if I'm thinking about it. But yeah, no, I gave back some time. I'm a good citizen. I know I went through this very fast, but 25 minutes. I wanted it to be broader, give a broad stroke of what could be. I'm very accessible. Oh yeah, of course. Then there's the NIST 800-207, so Spiffy, and if you totally look at SigStar, it started out as a Google project called Trillion. It still is based on that. Red Hat worked with Google to create sort of a simpler implementation, and it was originally around what they call a certificate transparency, but it also has the ability to create audit data. So a lot of the prototyping we're doing is using it for audit data as part of this automated governance structure that I mentioned earlier in the risk. And then this is the slide I thought I was going to get to. Thank you very much. I'm Bachgaloop. Again, like I said, I went through this really fast, but I'm very approachable, or I love having conversations. I will say that I'm probably not going to go into the open table room right now because I made a mistake. I'm on family vacation right now in Hawaii, so I'm actually 12 hours behind you, and my wife's trying to sleep right now while I'm yakking away. So, but please reach out to me. I mean, most of you who do know me, I love to have these kind of conversations. We'll get on a Zoom session. I like to learn from you. I mean, I'm more than anything in this industry, I consider myself a student of DevOps, a student of digital transformation. And the more hopefully next year I'll be there with you all, but the more I get to talk to all different people with their ideas, so much I learned. Anyway, thank you so much. We're good. I yield my time to the Devopsdays Amsterdam.
Thank you so much, John. Actually, perfectly in time. There's like 45 seconds left. So considering that you're in Hawaii, which I wasn't aware of, thank you so much for joining us all the way from literally the other side of the planet.
Yeah, no kidding, yeah. So
very interesting session. I think this verifiable security is something that can be quite a big thing in many organizations.
Yeah.
I know that we deal with a lot of fintech companies, and the larger the organization, the more traditional they think. And I think somebody asked in the chat, also in the previous talk, oh, but people don't do this anymore, right? Right. And then the reality is that, unfortunately, that's how most of the world looks.
That's right. We're still lopsided on all these things. We're still, we see the echo chamber where we're at right now, all this brilliant stuff that we're doing, we're talking about. But in large institutions, on a good day, it's 25%.
Yeah.
75% is still like in the old. So we got to be real careful as we think in these sort of our echo chamber. We have to be able to work with the other 75%. Well, anyway, yeah, no, I love one of my two favorite DevOps days is Amsterdam and Austin, and I can't wait. Hopefully next year to get back and visit with all of you. So.
Yes, would be great. All right, thanks, John. I'll let you go back to sleep, and let your wife go back to sleep.
That sounds good. Thanks, Walter. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.